Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my hands-on first looks review of the Canon EOS R6 Mark II, a full-frame mirrorless camera with a new 24 megapixel sensor and uncropped 4K up to 60p. I briefly tried out a pre-production model, and in this video I'll show you what's new and changed. Once I've spent some quality time with a final production sample, I'll add a link to my full review here. Announced in November 2022, the EOS R6 Mark II arrives just over 2 years after the original model and shares a similar starting price of around $2,500 or £2,600 for the body alone. Check the description for the latest pricing. Here's the original R6 on the left and the new Mark II version which replaces it on the right. And at first glance they look pretty similar, sharing the same core design, build quality and the same degree of weather sealing too. Indeed, viewed from the front, the only obvious difference is the absence of an infrared remote sensor on the Mark II grip and the new badge on the right. Meanwhile, from the rear, there's little to tell them apart beyond a mildly redesigned multi-controller joystick. The main external changes can be seen from the top, starting with the old power dial on the left, which is now used to switch between stills and video. Previously, you'd have to turn the main mode dial to the movie position and then adjust the exposure mode via the menus. Now that main mode dial can be used to set the exposure mode for both stills and video, just like the R7. Meanwhile, the actual power control on the Mark II has been relocated to a new collar switch around the upper thumb wheel. This allows you to turn the camera on or lock it. Eagle-eyed Canon fans may spot the Mark II mode dial now has extra positions on it for an auto mode, effects and scene presets, the latter including a panorama option inherited from the EOS R7. You also notice one of Canon's latest multi-function shoes in the middle, sporting those additional pins required to work with more sophisticated accessories, as well as traditional flash guns. In terms of composition, the R6 II shares the same 3-inch 1.62 million dot screen as the R6, along with its side hinged flip mechanism that you can twist up and down, forward to face you, or back on itself for protection. The viewfinder is also the same as before, so you're getting a 3.69 million dot OLED panel with 0.76 times magnification that runs at 60 or 120 frames per second. Also inherited from the R6 are twin SD card slots supporting UHS 2 speeds, albeit not embracing anything faster like CF Express. The ports are the same too, so you get 3.5mm microphone and headphone jacks, USB-C and micro HDMI, along with an E3 type remote terminal. The USB-C can be used for charging and powered operation with compatible power delivery sources, and since the R6 II also supports UVC, you can use it as a standard webcam. The battery, unsurprisingly, also remains the same LP-E6NH, although Canon now claims to squeeze a slightly longer life out of it. The big news is of course the sensor and its impact not just on photo and video quality, but the overall speed and handling of the camera. Canon claims it's a completely new sensor and not inherited from an older model. Canon's boosted the photo resolution from 20 to 24 megapixels, albeit resisted the temptation to directly compete with Sony's A7 IV or even its own older R and RP models on sheer pixel count alone. 24 megapixels may match the earlier EOS R3, but unsurprisingly the R6 II sensor doesn't share the same expensive stacked design. While this means the R6 II won't enjoy the minimal rolling shutter of the R3, Canon does claim it has slightly faster readout than the original R6 sensor, which in turn will hopefully make the electronic shutter more practical when panning or photographing fast subjects. After all, the R6 Mark I wasn't great in this regard. As before, the fastest burst speed with the mechanical shutter remains 12 frames per second, but if you switch to the electronic shutter, the H+ speed doubles the original rate to 40 frames per second, impressively at the full resolution and also in RAW if desired, as well as at shutter speeds up to 16,000th of a second. Canon claims up to 190 large JPEGs or 74 RAW files at the top 40 frames per second speed, making it much faster than the top 10 frames per second speed of the Sony A7 IV, whether using mechanical or electronic shutters, while also avoiding the further slowdowns on that model with certain RAW formats. The R6 II also inherits the RAW electronic burst mode at 30 frames per second with an optional half-second pre-capture period, handy for capturing the exact moment, say, a bird takes flight. So it's looking strong overall for the R6 II in terms of burst speeds, but the Sony should still have an advantage over this model when it comes to flushing its buffer with support for faster CF Express cards, at least in one of its 2 card slots. And while the pixels are smaller than the original R6, Canon is claiming that the noise levels should be similar at the same ISO values, and I will of course be putting all of this to the test in my final review. The R6 II also improves the sensor shift IBIS system, now boasting up to 8 stops of compensation with selected lenses, including some models that don't have optical image stabilization of their own. The dual pixel autofocus system inherits the deep learning algorithm from the EOS R3 and now adds horses and zebras to the animal detection, as well as vehicle recognition for aircraft and trains. Perhaps best of all though is a new auto option which will try to detect the subject type for you, which if it works will save you from manually switching between people, animals and vehicles. Of course, in the case of multiple subject types in the same frame, you can still manually override the system, such as choosing whether to focus on a horse's face or the human face of its rider. Like most Canon cameras, there's a bulb timer and focus bracketing built in as standard, features that are lacking from the Sony a7 Mark IV and which Sony has now only just started adding from the a7R5 onwards. But the EOS R6 goes one step further by also inheriting the depth composite option of the EOS R3 and R7, which can actually stack the images in camera, so no more mucking around in software afterwards. Moving on to video, the original R6 already supported 4K up to 60p with only the mildest of crops, but the Mark II takes it further by offering completely uncropped 4K from 24 to 60p and oversampling all of it too from 6K's worth of data at every frame rate. In contrast, the a7 IV only allows uncropped oversampled 4K up to 30p, reducing to an APS-C crop for 50 and 60p. There's unsurprisingly still no 4K 120, but the maximum 1080 frame rate enjoys a mild boost from 120 to 180 frames per second, nudging slightly ahead of the a7 IV's top speed of 120 frames per second. Like other new cameras, the R6 Mark II also offers unlimited recording times for video, eliminating one of the key advantages the a7 IV had over the original R6. Of course, it remains to be seen if the R6 II can also avoid the overheating issues of the Mark I model in order to match the long actual recording times that I've personally measured on the Sony a7 IV. In the meantime, the recent EOS R7 does at least prove that Canon can do it. And in case you're still in doubt which camera Canon is gunning for here, the R6 II also gains a new focus breathing compensation option for movies, a feature that Sony introed on the a7 Mark IV. Plus it gets a 3 or 5 second pre-record option for video, a new face-only AF mode, which waits for a person to re-enter a frame without refocusing on the background first, as well as a false colour option for evaluating movie exposure as an alternative to traditional zebra patterns. And finally, if you're into grading, you can capture footage in 10-bit using C-Log3 or the HLG profile, or output 6K RAW over HDMI to a compatible external recorder. Overall, the EOS R6 Mark II looks like a strong response to the gauntlet thrown by Sony's a7 Mark IV. It's fair to say the original R6 was trumped in many respects by Sony, but now with the Mark II, Canon's not just caught up but overtaken in a number of key respects. Most notably, the Mark II shoots much faster than the a7 IV while avoiding its various raw caveats, while the ability to film uncropped and oversampled 4K video up to 60 frames per second is a key advantage. Plus you're also getting focus bracketing and stacking in camera, bulb timers and potentially better IBIS too. Of course, the big question is how well all of this performs in practice. Will rolling shutter, not to mention the lack of a CF Express card slot, reduce the usefulness of those fast electronic bursts? And has Canon truly overcome the spectre of overheating for video on a mid-range full-frame camera? I'll answer all of that in my full review once I've tested a final production R6 II, and I'll link to that here when it's ready. But for now, I'm very impressed by the R6 Mark II, which seems to address most of my concerns with the original, and on paper at least appears to deliver a more compelling overall feature set than the a7 Mark IV at a similar launch price too, albeit with slightly lower photo resolution and still lacking that camera's broad array of native third-party lenses. So has Canon produced the camera that you've been waiting for? Are 24 megapixels enough, or should they have gone a bit higher? And does it suggest that an R5 Mark II might be waiting in the wings? Let me know what you think, and remember to subscribe if you'd like to be the first to see my final reviews or hear about official news. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.